And it's nice seeing you all and getting to meet many of you. Gabe Escobedo, I'm the chair of the Planning Commission, and I thought I would just go over a few important things that are going to be discussed at Planning Commission, but also at City Council for this year, for the city of Santa Barbara, that is. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a short presentation. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So short presentation, and really what I'm going to go over are some recent updates on discussion items from the Planning Commission recently, and then some key work efforts that we have on the horizon. Going to go over multi-unit housing policy because that's the biggest topic pretty much for every jurisdiction and definitely for the city of Santa Barbara. And then do my best to not confuse you as we discuss the two different routes that the city is deciding on going when discussing multi-unit housing policy. And then some important dates to keep in your calendar as we look forward to updating our housing element, but also our multi-unit housing policy. So some updates. Recently, Planning Commission and City Council both had meetings regarding ADU, which is accessory dwelling units, also known as granny flats or ADUs in the coastal zone. So for the city of Santa Barbara, we have two zoning areas. We have the inland zone, which you can think of being split by the 101 freeway, and then we have the coastal zone. And in the coastal zone, we are subject to the Coastal Act and ultimately the Coastal Commission. And so for important policy interpretations, they're done by the Coastal Commission. In the past, Coastal Commission has had a history of interpreting accessory dwelling units as not really needing a certain permit. I'm blanking on it right now and it'll come to me. But in recent weeks, they just released a memo saying that now all accessory dwelling units in the coastal zone now have to go through an additional permitting process, which creates additional barriers for these accessory dwelling units. And ADUs are seen as one of many tools for our affordable housing crisis. They tend to be lower cost. They tend to be much easier thanks to recent state law. They are by right now in most areas, but now the Coastal Commission has changed past interpretations to make the process more expensive and a little bit longer as well. I imagine that you'll see local jurisdictions pushing back on this quite a bit coming up soon, probably by the end of the year, I would imagine. Next is Planning Commission just had a meeting on multi-unit housing policy, specifically focusing on parking standards, open yard requirements, which open yard requirements are requirements for multi-unit projects to have common open area for the people living there to enjoy outdoor space, basically, and then landscaping. And the idea is with these new projects to require landscaping so that we don't have areas of the city that are deficient when it comes to urban greening. The next is, as you all are probably aware of, is that we received last year our new numbers for the regional housing needs allocation. And this is currently the 6th cycle. So I'm going to actually go to the next slide and it'll give you a breakdown for our county. The regional housing needs allotment is done every 6 years, I believe. And it's from the state. They give each general area a certain number of units that they have to build in certain income categories. So as you can see here, you'll see the RHNA allocation numbers, and that'll give you the total numbers. And then on the right side, you'll see it broken down by income categories. And these are the numbers that each of these cities and jurisdictions are expected to zone for in their next housing element. So I talked a little bit about, or Dick brought up the housing element process. It's in response to this RENA allocation update. And you'll notice that for the city of Santa Barbara, 8,001 units are a part of the RENA allocation. For the whole county, it's a little under 25,000. And through the housing element update, the city is going to have to identify parcels in the city that can accommodate this number of units. And they're going to have to prove it to Housing and Community Development at the state level. And there's a long process that you have to go through in order to provide that justification for identifying a site as a potential place for housing. But I won't go into that because it gets a little too much into the weeds. So for this year's upcoming work efforts, we are going to do our housing element update. They already started the process by putting an RFP out for a consultant to lead us through the housing element update. We're also going to have the climate action plan update this year. It will come to Planning Commission before it goes to City Council. And then a big one is going to be multi-unit housing policy. And the big discussion that's happening right now, and it'll be at City Council on Tuesday, is whether we want our multi-unit housing policy to be done by density or whether we want it to be done by building size. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time going through both of those, and again, hopefully not confusing anyone, but just talking about the distinction of the two. And the first is density, and that's our current program. So here in the city of Santa Barbara, we have the average unit size density program. It's a trial program, so it is right now has a deadline to sunset next year. I think it's the beginning of next year. And the goal is to replace the trial program with a permanent program. So it creates a little bit more certainty for folks that they know for multi-unit housing projects that the rules will be those rules for the foreseeable future, because projects can take up to 6 years to be completed. When you regulate multi-unit housing by density, you do it by acre. And currently we have 3 different designations for the type of density. And we separate it out throughout the city, and we identify places where higher density is appropriate and other places where lower density is appropriate. Right here, you'll see a map with yellow and red. So yellow indicates that it's considered medium high density. And then you'll see the red areas that are considered high density, and high density is defined as 28 to 36 dwelling units per acre. So if you had a 1 acre lot, you could have the maximum of 36 units on that lot. And then you'll see the crosshatched areas in certain areas of this map, primarily in the downtown area or the central business district. And the crosshatched areas is called a priority housing overlay. And what this means is if you meet certain requirements and you qualify as a priority housing project, you can then qualify for a whole nother tier of density. And the priority housing overlay is anywhere from 36 units to 63 units per acre as it is right now. So if you had a 1 acre lot, you'd be able to get a maximum of 63 units on there. Some of the discussions that we've been going through is one, what qualifies as a priority housing overlay? Right now, market rate housing typically qualifies for that priority housing designation. The thought is, the argument on that behalf is that we are so deficient in rental housing that we need rental housing. And because of that, we want to incentivize it. So we incentivize it with a higher density. Another discussion that we're having is where in the city should this happen. There's been some discussion. You could see on the Milpas corridor here on the map that it's red and it has a crosshatched areas. There has been some discussion of lowering the maximum density allowed there because of whether or not it can accommodate increased traffic, if there's enough public transit infrastructure there to accommodate high priority housing overlay densities. And then there's been additional discussion about whether or not we want to regulate by densities at all. And if we do, does it offer us the type of housing that we're looking for? There's been a lot of discussion about what are called micro units. So they're efficiency units, much smaller. They come with efficiency furniture, so it doesn't feel like a small unit. And there have been proposals to have this in the downtown area. But in order to get that in the downtown area, you would need higher densities, which is why you see on the right here, higher density. So these are proposed densities for Tuesday's council meeting. I'll go over that a little bit more later in the presentation. But there is a proposal to have higher densities for each of these categories to allow for much smaller units. Because if you're a developer and you're going to build on, let's say, a 1 acre lot, you're probably trying to maximize those units. So you're going to choose 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms instead of these micro units. Versus if you have higher densities, you have a little bit more room to give, you might go with the efficiency units, the micro units. Another way of achieving that same goal is by regulating instead of by density, so how many units per acre, you can regulate by building size.
Anna, I have.
This is the map right now for building size, but I actually want to show a short video if I can. We don't have to watch the whole thing through.
What if you could get rid of your kitchen garbage at the push of a button?
What if you could?
Hey, I'm Matt from Pila, and I want to introduce you to my friend Lomi.
All right.
So
this animation, what it's going to do is it's going to give you an idea of what it looks like to regulate by building size instead of by density. And one of the ways that I conceptualize it is if you maxed out and they're going to talk about this, maxed out a parcel that you're going to build on, you would have a building envelope. And if you look at the wired area here, that's the building envelope. But because we have other development standards, either design standards, development standards, building code standards, you never really get to that full building envelope. And this is going to show what it could look like and why going to an FAR system is preferable for some.
Animation illustrates potential build-out scenarios for a theoretical 10,000 square foot lot in downtown Santa Barbara. Floor-to-lot area ratio, or FAR, is reported for each scenario starting with a 2-story building. This first view is about 80 feet away from the building, the standard width of State Street. The wire box illustrates the property lines and the 60-foot city charter height limit. Typical apartments built in commercial corridors would have some, if not all, of the first floor as commercial. Apartments or residential condominiums would start on the second floor. Buildings that have a mix of residential and non-residential uses are called mixed use. Currently, buildings on State Street primarily have commercial uses on the first floor and offices above. The next view is above the building. While this building is constructed to the sidewalk, like you would typically see along State Street, most buildings are set back from the street, or have visual interest, or aesthetic treatments like the arches. The light yellow color denotes the interior hallway and stairwells. The white area is a livable apartment area. Once again, you can see how the building's second floor is inset from the front and rear property lines. This allows for the units to have light, air, and access to patios above the first story. This 2-story building has an FAR of 1.6. This second animation shows the 3-story scenario, with the third story matching the second story. From this vantage point, the second and third story setback of the residential units for that open space is more apparent. The building size and height are similar to the adjacent building's size and height.
So I'm going to fast forward a little bit so
This
that we
building
can
with one,
get to,
which would
they do a really
this building
they do a really neat thing here in that they show you the animation and then show you something what it could look like with a design element.
would provide approximately 27 new apartments. This scenario could be considered for a project with affordable housing beyond the standard requirement. This shows a more developed rendering of the building with consideration of city design guidelines. Please participate in the surveys and mapping.
So that was a quick video, and I can send that out so you can see the rest of it. But the idea behind having a floor to lot area ratio, FAR, system, which regulates by building size rather than number of units, is it's more predictable for what the outcome and what the building looks like and its effect on neighborhoods than you can get from density. Because density, you're going to get different sizes of units. You're going to get an average, but you're going to get different sizes of units. There's a lot of other considerations versus an FAR, floor to lot area ratio system. You are basically providing what that building envelope will look like. And so you'll generally know what the building size is. And then going through the design process is where you'll get all of those elements that we saw, the design elements we saw at the end there. And then you allow the developer, and obviously there's going to be some regulations so that we don't get these just a few really large luxury units, but you offer a lot more flexibility on how many units, what type of units can go in there, and you're not constrained by something that can sometimes be confusing is average unit size. So here's a map. This is a potential map that the city went out and did some public outreach on, where you would have the highest FARs in that in downtown area, and then from there it feathers out. There was a proposal that there would be different tiers. So this would be the baseline tier, and then from there, for increased affordability, you would get additional FAR for your parcel of land. So for someone like the Housing Authority, they should get a higher FAR or building size than a market rate developer. And to get, here's another visualization of kind of generally what FAR is. So if you have one story, if you have one FAR and you build lot line to lot line 1 story, that is 1 FAR. If you did it on half, it would be 2 stories, and so on and so forth. Realistically, because there are things like setbacks and there are other considerations, both design and building and safety, you're not, it's not as simple as this, and typically you're going to get something smaller than the building envelope in almost every situation. So even though it says a maximum of 3 FAR, oftentimes you won't get to 3 FAR just because of all of these considerations. And then I'll finish off with what upcoming meetings we have, and then I'll answer some of the questions we got coming in. So upcoming meetings that we have, City Council on Tuesday will be receiving a presentation from staff, and staff are going to ask City Council whether they want to go with building size to guide our multi-unit housing policy, or if they want to go with density. And density with those new proposed density limits and giving that a try as we move forward with establishing our permanent plan that will replace the AUD program. On the following Thursday, so next Thursday, Planning Commission is also going to be receiving a training on the state's bonus density law. And this is going to be really valuable. And if you can attend, I would suggest that you do, because this is the vehicle that many nonprofit developers use, and increasingly even for-profit or market rate developers use state bonus density. And it's with increased affordability in the project, you get concessions. They're called concessions, and you basically, they could be parking requirement concessions, so you don't have to meet the parking requirements. It could be height restriction requirements that you get some exemptions from, just because you're going to add some more affordable units into the project. So that's going to be helpful. And then at Planning Commission on March 10th, we're going to get basically it's called a programmatic environmental impact report scoping. And this is going to be one of the first processes for updating the housing element. So it's going to be a really important discussion. That is my presentation. And I know that there are some questions we have here, and that was a lot of information. But let's see.
I just, I'll start by, which I often do as the professor. So in terms of the FAR versus more traditional density, so is the commission divided on that question? Is there a tension about this or conflict?
There is. So staff came to Planning Commission at the end of last year and received mixed feedback, which is why they're going to City Council on Tuesday. And there's a lot of tension about what FAR could mean. The reason why FAR is a very difficult program or approach to implement is it's very hard to conceptualize. And the reason why it's hard to conceptualize is because it's so lot specific that different parcels of land have different site constraints. And because of that, what let's say a 2 FAR would mean on one site would mean something much different on that site than it would on another lot that has much different site constraints. And it becomes somewhat difficult to kind of nail down what the appropriate FAR is. So there's a lot of tension about that because it is so hard to conceptualize. There are some that don't want to go too far and have buildings that are too large. If someone asked for my opinion, so no one did, but I'll give it anyways, is I think FAR offers a more predictable building size, and it also offers more flexibility. So FAR in many ways, in my mind, is preferable because we are theoretically possibly limiting the number of units that someone like the housing authority could get. And these numbers, 63 units per acre, I haven't really ever been given a justification for why those are the numbers. And they seem somewhat arbitrary. So picking a building size makes much more sense to me.
And then the other point I wanted to see if we can get a little more information about is the housing element process. In other words, in the past, I remember a few years ago, big, long process with a lot of community participation built in and so forth. This is less of a process, I understand, from what you're saying, right?
Well, there definitely is going to be a public outreach process. And in fact, it's mandated by the state that there's a public outreach process. I heard from a person, but I've also heard conflicting reports. So I'm still waiting to get clarification on this, on whether or not the timeline has been moved up. And if the timeline has been moved up for the due date of the housing element, it means that the window for public outreach could likely be smaller and the turnaround time is going to be quicker. Which that just means that myself, other planning commissioners, the city, and everyone in this meeting who would like to be a part of the process is just getting the word out is going to be that much more urgent when we hear about the public outreach strategy from the city.
So who is actually setting this timetable? It's the city staff?
Yeah, it's going to be long range planning staff. And so I believe Dan Gollett is spearheading it with Jessica Metzger and then whoever the consultant is. And I haven't heard anything about who they're going to choose for a consultant. But I imagine that we'll hear pretty soon because there's a lot of work to do pretty quickly.
Rosemary, we're seeing more of you than we want. Anyway, so are there chat questions for Gabe that we can highlight? Looking at this.
So I see one in the chat from Christian. Yeah, this is what I went over in terms of building size was definitely the FAR program. And then Spencer, in terms of, is the FAR system the same as form-based code? It's similar. Form-based code, which has been brought up from time to time, form-based code is FAR, but more granular. And so you're basically going block by block to pick the FARs for each essentially site so that you you have more predictability about what size buildings you're going to have in different neighborhoods. So this has obviously been pretty attractive for some because they probably believe that there are certain building sizes that are not appropriate for certain neighborhoods. And the issue is that to do it at that granular level, it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. And you need to get a lot of input. So it's definitely something that's been discussed. I would not be surprised if it doesn't get discussed again, either on Tuesday or shortly thereafter.
And this is about the AUG area, right? It's not the entire city that we're talking about, but those areas that you've highlighted on the maps that you showed us, right?
Correct. So areas that have been designated as sites for multi-unit housing. So anything more than 2 units.
All right, well, questions. People can know how to raise your hand in Zoom. There's Gary Michaels, who lives up north. He's asking about ADU.
Yeah. ADUs for Santa Maria, I believe, stay the same. So the ADU standard, they should be pretty close to by right. It should be what's called ministerial process. So staff handles all of the permitting, and there's no need to go to a planning commission for a discretionary review. There's no need to go, I don't know what the design standards are for Santa Maria, but I'm pretty sure they don't even go to a design review, that it's all ministerial. And it's supposed to be a really straightforward process. The state has worked really hard the last 4 or 5 years to update the ADU state law to make sure that it's as easy and as short of a process as possible for people to add ADUs. And it is seen as a remedy for affordable housing. It has been mentioned at times as providing incentives for people with ADUs if they provide it as a solution for homelessness. But I don't think that there is a program like that in place right now.
So in a way, this is like what SB 9 and the bills that the legislature recently had done to try to increase densities and streamline approvals. the AUD process we instituted has a similar intent. And now you're coming to the point of making it a permanent feature of our overall plan. Is that right? And so, yeah. So I'm still trying to understand what difference the FAR versus density approaches might be. Let me try one example. If people saw the charrette results that the architects did for State Street, did they assume an FAR approach when they showed these designs for the buildings there? Do you know? I mean,
they did pretty much. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they're big the architects who've been engaged in all this are very passionate about making this kind of change. How would you summarize why?
Because it's a much easier approach to work with. When you're doing it by average unit size and density, it becomes a complicated arithmetic to figure out what type of units you're going to have. So right now, what architects are doing is they are crunching the numbers to figure out what mix of units they need to have in this project in order to meet that average unit size requirement. And then they're designing the building. And so whatever the building comes out on the other end is as a result of this really complicated arithmetic that your average person doesn't understand. Versus doing the building size, you do it the other way around. You know what your building envelope is, you know what your requirements are, and you design the building and then figure out what units are going to fit inside that building. And oftentimes there's a lot more units that can fit in that building envelope using an FAR approach than what I would term is an arbitrary density limit per acre. Again, I've never been given any justification for why we picked 63 units per acre instead of 64 or 61. So FAR, if you ask an architect, they would probably say FAR is just an easier program to work with.
So, Vijaya, why don't you verbally state what your question is?
Oh, she's right, by the way, in there. It's so
sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So Gabe, we know that ADUs are not considered affordable housing in the city of Santa Barbara. The rents are just too high and unreachable for most people. So I don't know why, we think ADUs will be affordable. It cannot.
Well, I agree with you. And the ADU approach from the state and also locally is really a way to provide more density in single family zoned areas, because you're not going to get multi-unit housing really there. SB9, SB10 are also a way of doing that exact thing. But you're right. Really the only, and now again, I'm not representing the Planning Commission or the city of Santa Barbara, but really the only way that you get affordable housing is with deed restricted units. And that's only done either as the inclusionary rate that we have now in the city, which is 10%, and it's really low. You're only talking about a couple units per project, or you have the housing authority and other nonprofit developers that are building deed restricted units. Yes, and thank you, Spencer. AUDs, which is why it's so confusing, and I can't wait until we change to a different name. Yeah. But average unit density, AUD, is different than ADU. Accessory dwelling units are what we're talking about, the granny flats and the auxiliary units that you would build on a single family zone lot. Average unit density is the multi-unit housing policy. But yeah, her point is well taken. The rents are too high to qualify for affordable, and really if we're going to build units and we want them to be affordable, they have to be deed restricted. I don't see how you get a market rate project that that is affordable.
Right, and simply leaving it to private developers with incentives of density has not worked.
Yeah.
I guess some architects thought you could do affordability by design for rental housing, and that's the whole point about the FAR, that you can create more apartments, smaller apartments that will be able to be sold more cheaply.
Mhm.
But the market isn't working that way, is it? In your opinion? I mean, it may be the opposite, that that the rents will continue to go up because the people who are building this are after the highest possible rents, or the people who are controlling that market. That's what I think we're dealing with now. It's not just market pressures raising rents. It's a different strategy, a different business model about housing that is now taking over some of the housing development nationally. It may even be an emergency in that way. People are being forced out of communities because high-end developing strategies are being adopted, or ownerships are changing. Hedge funds are taking over, trying to maximize short-run profits on rental housing. That's my sermon. This is part of why we're in this midst, why the rent stabilization effort is underway in the city, to try to get regulation of rent in the face of market failure. That's how I would put it. Does that make any sense, or am I going overboard?
No. You're hitting it on the head. And I think it's a discussion that I'm hoping that we can have in this housing element update process, is thinking more holistically about housing. It's not just a supply and demand issue. It is, we do need more supply. There is a great deal of demand, but there's also what happens when the housing is built. And Dick, you hit it on the head. We have corporations that are buying up single family homes and other properties. We have this affordability by design argument I've always been skeptical of. I like the idea of a rental registry, which is a part of the rent stabilization conversation, because then you can see things like that over a long period of time. You have the data to actually back up particular statements. I also like the idea of having nonprofit developers and the housing authority on a different development process. It's why the idea of, if you go to FAR, there should be a whole nother tier of incentives for 100% affordable projects. It doesn't make sense that the development process would be the same. So, and then on top of that, you throw in short-term vacation rentals, which eats up at rental stock. You throw in vacant homes, second homes that just sit vacant for most of the year. So yeah, there's a lot that we need to do if we want to see affordable housing.
I think we're going to be debating these and focusing on these, many of us from here on in, and we have been, many of us have been. So I think we need to shift in terms of our time to the second big discussion here, which we're going to call on Christian Alonso and talk about the police issues and Community Formation Commission. Thank you a lot, Gabe, and I know you've been a regular coming to this, so we'll be in continuing dialogue about and getting educated about all of these fascinating and urgent questions about housing. Christian, hi.
Hi, Dick. How's it going?
Good.
Give me just 1 second here. Okay, do I have co-host capabilities to share? I do. Okay, great. Give me
Yeah,
one
I think
second
so.
here. Alrighty, well, thanks for inviting me, everyone. Gabe is wearing two hats here today because we're both on the Community Formation Commission, but thank you for providing space for us to present to your group. We're going to talk about who we are, why we're here, and why we're going, or where we're going as a commission. So we're here today to introduce ourselves as the Community Formation Commission to create civilian oversight of the Santa Barbara Police Department. We're going to describe the process that the CFC is working through currently on that commission. We'll describe where we are currently in that process, outline next steps for the commission, and then hear from all of you and answer any questions you might have. So one of the things we want to do is explain what the Community Formation Commission is. Basically, the CFC is a 12-member commission that is charged with the task of developing a recommendation to the City Council, the Santa Barbara City Council, for civilian oversight of the Santa Barbara Police Department. It's important to note that our commission is not providing the actual oversight of the Santa Barbara Police Department. A lot of folks are confused. I know I was confused about that initially as well. So far, we've explored on our commission, we've undertaken a pretty big research effort to explore different civilian oversight models, different systems that are being deployed throughout the country in similar jurisdictions to Santa Barbara and not so similar jurisdictions to Santa Barbara. We've researched new and existing police accountability systems and reviewed existing Santa Barbara Police Department policies and procedures. So this slide with all of these beautiful people shows our 12 current commissioners that have a pretty wide variety of work and life experience. The commission began in 2020 when the City Council voted to establish it in the wake of the protests surrounding the murder of George Floyd. 93 people applied to be on this commission, and of those applicants, 13 commissioners plus 2 alternates were chosen. The commission is made up of a pretty diverse, enthusiastic set of community members, and we're representing, as we said, a wide range of demographics, professions, and neighborhoods. So our group has a pretty wide variety of perspectives, and through facilitated discussions, our goal has been to work together to develop a recommendation that represents the whole community. So we understand that there are a wide variety of perspectives, life experiences, and needs as it relates to the topic of civilian oversight of the police. And our intention throughout this process has been to consider all of those perspectives and have robust debate and conversation about it. So in order to provide a thoughtful recommendation, we have partnered with 2 separate organizations. The first is the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, otherwise known as NACOL. They're the national organization that has worked with jurisdictions like ours to set up civilian oversight. NACOL is actually has been a great partner in facilitating our discussions and guiding us through the process of developing our own recommendation. The second organization that we've been working with is the Center for Court Innovation. And what they've been helping us do is create a survey to analyze and data through direct community outreach. So NACOL is like the expertise on the issue of civilian oversight. CCI is helping us to actually gather community input on the recommendation from various different interest groups. And so to better understand the elements of the model that we have moved forward with and that we'll be recommending, it helps to know a little bit more about the different components there. So the review mechanisms will allow for the creation of a volunteer board that will be able to review complaint investigations once they are completed by the Santa Barbara Police Department. The most important aspects of the review model include number 1, its ability for community members to provide input into the complaint investigation process. Number 2, the involvement of community in the review of investigations, which ultimately will have the effect of building trust in the process if it's open and transparent and there's an avenue for the community to participate. And then number three, these types of review boards can also broaden their focus to engage with the community, to conduct community outreach on the issue of policing, and also engaging with law enforcement and working on the policy and procedure issues that exist across departments in the United States and certainly in the Santa Barbara Police Department. So, oh, excuse me, let me go back. The other portion of the model that we have proposed is the auditor monitor function. So this auditor monitor component adds a more proactive element to our process. So number one, often it has more robust reporting mandates for communities that have employed this model, which ultimately is going to lead to more information for the community on these outcomes, right? With regard to police conduct. Number two, it's going to promote long-term systematic change through data analysis and policy recommendation. And number three, it's going to allow our oversight agency to actively engage in many or all of the steps of the complaint process, right? The process by which civilians can submit a complaint to about a specific police officer, about specific conduct, and not just the public, but also internal complaints as well from other police staff or city staff. And so the investigation focused models that are out there, they consist of full-time civilian investigators that are trained to conduct investigations. This oversight model doesn't rely on investigators from within the police department that's being overseen. And then, civilian-led investigations tend to increase public trust overall in the investigation process where they're deployed. And so one of the things to note about the model that we're proposing is that it's actually this last type. It's a hybrid model. So that this is a more recent approach to oversight because there are components of each of these models that have benefits. And so it's to apply components of these other three to fit the specific needs of the jurisdiction and to account for local and state laws. And so in taking all of that into consideration, the CFC has decided to move forward with a hybrid model. And basically, where we're at in that process is that we have determined to recommend this hybrid oversight agency that will include elements of both the review focused model and the auditor monitor focused model. We're also exploring the possibility of allowing for independent investigations when the oversight body feels it is warranted in the course of their review of internal affairs investigations. Oops. So the commission's currently drafting language that outlines and defines the various aspects of the oversight framework. Recently, the CFC unanimously voted to approve the purpose statement that you see here for the review board portion of the model. And on this slide, we have the approved language for the purpose of the review board, right? So it's really, if you think about our review board, it's two components. It's this review board that's made up of appointed citizens, civilians, and then it's also this auditor monitor and a new office within the city that will work together to review internal affairs investigations. So on this slide, you can see the purpose statement for the volunteer civilian board, and it's long, but on the next slide we'll highlight some key portions of this statement. So the key parts are really, one, to ensure that the Santa Barbara Police Department is responsive to the concerns and needs of all members of the Santa Barbara community. Number two, to help in building public trust, transparency, and accountability for the Santa Barbara Police Department. Number three, independent, objective community participation in reviewing and recommending revisions to police department policies, procedures, and training. And then number four, to provide a mechanism for the impartial and fair review of investigations completed by the Santa Barbara Police Department regarding allegations of police misconduct. And so where do we go from here? So far, we've gone over, what the CFC is, what the process is, and where we are. And so where we're going is, as you can see by this timeline, is this will carry us through April, when we hope to ultimately deliver our recommendation to the City Council. So we're planning on having the draft recommendation complete by the end of February. In the last meeting that we had, we're pretty close. We're at the 10-yard line. We really do have to do some cleanup and review. We're going through legal review right now, so it's very interesting. But there's some conflicts with the city charter and the Brown Act and some other things. So we're cleaning up the language, but we're right there at the 10-yard line. And where we're actually starting now is taking the draft language that we've approved and going to the community with it. So we're conducting the survey and focus groups, and we're going to use that feedback to refine further some of the recommendations. So the goal is to finalize it all by April and have that presented to the City Council. And so that's our presentation. And I would love to take any questions and stop talking and maybe let Gabe jump in here too, if anyone wants to start the questions.
So Christian, there are a bunch of questions right on the chat, if you can reference that. George Eskin had several questions. I guess they're basically, what was the foundation for creating this process? Were there problems in the police behavior that reported incidents, he says, of abusive police conduct? What's the empirical foundation for why this has happened, other than the Black Lives Matter movement itself? Was there a specific rationale for this or basis for it?
Well, look, so when we started this work, I think that a lot of us thought that, civilian oversight is new. It's not new. It's actually very old. I mean, we have like civilian oversight going back to the 19th century, at the start of the formation of the police as an institution. So lots of jurisdictions across the United States have deployed oversight mechanisms as an effective way to oversee a public service, right? A public service that oftentimes is charged with deadly force, right? And enforcing laws in the community. So there are many jurisdictions in the state of California that had oversight long before the Black Lives Matter protests kind of brought it more to the fore. And we believe that, Santa Barbara should follow this best practice. So specifically what brought it to the fore was the Black Lives Matter protest from June 2020. It was part of a list of demands from Healing Justice Santa Barbara to the City Council to create reform of our policing in our community. And so that's kind of what brought us to the city to create the commission and for us to apply to be on the commission. But I think that we're not alone, right? Santa Barbara is not some magic outlier. There's hundreds and hundreds of jurisdictions throughout the United States that employ civilian oversight effectively, different forms, and there's ongoing debate about which ones are the most effective. But generally speaking, one of the cool things about NACOLE, and I would check out their website, it's nacole.org, NACOLE.org. They outline 13 principles of effective oversight that we have tried to emulate in our recommendations. So it has to be funded and supported. It has to be independent, and various other criteria for effective oversight. And so, yeah, it's not a specific incident. It's just a good practice generally to have oversight of the police, because I think if you look at just from a dollars and cents perspective, misconduct is expensive. Police misconduct is expensive. So if we're having a layer of oversight, yes, it comes at a cost to the public to employ a new city employee to be looking at these cases. But ultimately, the benefit of that is so we don't have to pay out multiple millions of dollars of settlements when police misconduct occurs. Or at least that's the way that I've tried to look at it as we've gone through the process. So I see a lot of questions in here. Let me see. did we make an evidence-based determination that there is a need? I think I covered that.
Yeah, no,
in-
so let me, I've been following this. So Nadia asks, is there a mechanism to ensure the police department will listen to the review commission's recommendations? You know, what is going to, yeah, what's the relationship between the commission and police outcomes?
Yeah, so ultimately, here, Gabe, you take a stab at that so I'm not talking the whole time.
All right. So in our recommendation, there's not so much requirement. So the oversight agency, they can recommend policy, procedures, training for the Santa Barbara Police Department. And the Santa Barbara Police Department isn't mandated to agree with the recommendations and actually apply them. But what they are mandated to do is to respond to them. And if they disagree with the recommendations, they must provide a reason why. And we feel that that's an important aspect because much of this is not only, I think sometimes it gets distilled down to kind of like trying to pin the police and those gotcha moments and trying to catch them doing something wrong. But really what it's about is about building a communication channel from the broader community to the Santa Barbara Police Department. And one of the places that it can happen is in a public meeting with a board of civilian members and the Santa Barbara Police Department, where we communicate things such as policy recommendations. And then there's a reply from the police department about whether or not they agree. And if they disagree, why is that? And then maybe there's some context that we're missing, but it's important for the community to understand why and provide that space for folks to speak up about the way that they're being policed in our community. I think that's really important. I think one thing that was very impactful on me is we've been doing these presentations with quite a few stakeholder groups in the community. And also with Santa Barbara Police Department, they were the first ones that we had actually gone out to, and we went to all of their briefings providing the same information. But one of the presentations that I had done was with Stessa, who works with sexual assault survivors, and they actually work really closely with Santa Barbara Police Department, have a really good relationship with them. But one of the things that they had mentioned to me that doesn't always get caught in complaints and it doesn't get caught up in the statistics and it's not use of force, but it was very important is when you have a survivor and they're deciding whether or not to go through with the process of reporting and filing charges and seeking support, the barrier is already high. Of the survivors that work with SBCAN, only 30% of them go through the process. And one of the concerns that they raised in our presentation was, you know, and I think we could all acknowledge being an officer is hard, right? And it comes with trauma, and sometimes that trauma comes out in different ways, and sometimes it's impatience, sometimes it's a snide remark, sometimes it's an eye roll because you just had a long day. Well, that happens sometimes with these survivors as they're reporting to the police. And one of the things that they had raised that I think was really impactful for me is, you know, we understand their job is hard, but when they do that to a person who's already finding it really difficult to go through this process, it makes the barrier that much harder. And so it seems like a really small thing, right? Because we're not talking about a use of force thing. We're not talking about something that we have seen in other jurisdictions, but it is really, really important. And so that getting that feedback and being able to find solutions, we believe that our recommendation for civilian oversight does that. We think that it will have the opportunity to take a look at those things and say, hey, is there a way for us to be proactive about this issue? Is there additional training needed? Do the officers need to be aware of this? So that those harms that don't get caught in the statistics, we can address those too. And so much of it is, I see these questions about whether it's evidence-based and it's based on data and facts. It is based on life experience and it's based on some really real impacts that don't always get caught in those statistics. So yeah, that was probably a longer answer to your question, but I think it's an important point that I wanted to make.
So
Yeah,
Bill,
and I think,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Christian.
well, I think the only thing I would just add to like, because I think Nadia's question goes to the ultimate question of like, does this thing or will this thing have teeth? Well, my answer to that is, you know, we're making recommendations to the city council. So ultimately, the city council is going to decide what the ordinance looks like in conjunction with city staff and the city attorney, right? So like, and maybe you've seen this time and again, but like I've seen it enough times to understand that like a commission makes recommendations and then the city council does what the city council is going to do. So like our hope and the way that we've crafted this is that they will adopt most of the language that we've provided in our recommendations in the actual ordinance. So I guess to the question of like whether it will have teeth, that's going to come down to more than just this process, right? Like our commission was charged with providing recommendations to create the oversight. I think we need the oversight. Every police department will benefit from oversight, and our police department is welcoming this, right? Chief Malekian, interim Chief Malekian, and Lieutenant Sean Hill have been part of every single meeting with the public in support of having this type of relationship with the community. But I think ultimately we have some other issues as far as like being able to deploy recommendations on discipline because of the charter, right? Because of the Santa Barbara City Charter. And so while this effort has been huge, and I think it will provide a lot of benefit to the city, I think that like we as a community need to continue to be engaged in this issue and look at how we can make amendments to the city charter, because today it's just like pretty much the city council can hire and fire the city administrator, who can hire and fire the police chief, right? And that's kind of really the main mechanism by which our charter outlines how that works, right? So if you're in conflict with that charter, like a commission cannot, you know, hold the police chief accountable to any specific policy or way they handled an investigation. But it's bringing that process into a public forum, which I think is much better than where we currently stand, where it's happening in internal affairs and the public doesn't have an opportunity to weigh in. But let's get to the next question.
So the question has been raised that I've heard a lot of. There's something in your draft that rules out anyone with past connection to a police department would be excluded from the board. Bill Goldsmith asking, and I've heard many ask, why there might be officers, former officers, or people with connections like that would be extremely helpful on the board because of what they know and what they can offer in way of how to actually deal directly with the police. So what's going on with that?
So I'll start by saying this was a really tough discussion that we had multiple times on the commission, and it was really close. And so we're going to be paying attention to the public outreach and the feedback that we get there to inform whatever the final draft is as it relates to this particular point. But I'll make the argument for where we ended up is, you know, this police officers, and we'll just talk about the Santa Barbara Police Department, they are involved in every part of the process. Right now, there doesn't currently exist a point at which the larger community beyond the Santa Barbara Police Department is involved in the process. The argument is that this civilian oversight board would be their involvement, and that it should be broader than law enforcement, and that they wanted to be independent of law enforcement. Now, in our model, there are multiple aspects. So there's a civilian oversight board, but there's also the auditor piece. And there's going to be professional staff that are going to be doing the day-to-day civilian oversight. That person can be former law enforcement. that person, oftentimes in other communities, when they have that role, they are former law enforcement, because they need to be able to speak the same language. They need to understand policies and procedures. They need to be able to form that relationship with internal affairs and the larger Santa Barbara Police Department in order to be successful in their job. So we're talking about, in one portion of the model, precluding former law enforcement from being on it. But there are so many other areas of the process, and even in our recommendation, where they have a voice. They have the Santa Barbara Police Department has a liaison to the board. The auditor can be former law enforcement. So this is just one piece of a much larger system in which we said, you know, we're going to preserve this for the broader community. Yeah, so that's where we're at right now, but we're going out and we're doing public outreach, both in the survey and in focus groups, to get feedback from you all on how you feel about that, and let us know if you're supportive of that approach. Let us know if you're vehemently against it. Let us know. If you're not sure, also let us know, because we want that information.
Yes, so Bill, do you want to respond to that? You still express your concern?
No, I mean, it seems to me that's not an unreasonable answer. I would differ. I would think that the commission, which is actually the key new element, would benefit enormously. One thinks that the current mayor of New York was a cop for his entire career. He knows a great deal more about policing in New York and its underbelly than almost any civilian would know, except possibly attorneys who've been suing the police. Obviously, Santa Barbara is not New York City. It's not the same, but I can't see any reason whatsoever for excluding somebody who'd been a cop, you know, in Sacramento for 20 years, retired to Santa Barbara, serving on the commission. I just doesn't make any sense to me. That's all. I've been involved in efforts to oversee police departments very indirectly for a long, long time, and I don't see that it makes it any stronger to do it that way. But
Well, let me make one thing that I'm not clearer. When Gabe talked, you talk about this is for the wider community, that the commission's for the wider community to be able to address the police department. But maybe in what Bill Goldsmith's saying is there are people, and I know them, maybe you know them, who are not from the local police force, but have former FBI agents, former people in prosecutorial roles in the past who retired here or who live here. Are they part of the same policy, or is it specifically about current or people allied with the police department locally?
It's all former law enforcement. If you had experience as a law enforcement officer, you would be precluded from participating as it's written now. And I'll also say, Bill, I don't think, sworn law enforcement. Thank you, Christian. I don't think your point is unreasonable. And it was one that we had discussed quite a bit, is the distinctions, and there are pros and cons to both. One of the discussions that came up is not just the actual conflicts that could come with someone that has previous law enforcement experience, but it's also the perceived, right? Is how the broader community perceives this board is really important on how effective it's going to be. And that's where we ended it in the conversation, that it was, again, a very contentious conversation that was really close. Multiple times. I've seen I'm reading his comment. So it's definitely happened in other jurisdictions where this is a practice. That's where we ended up. We're interested to see what feedback we get from the larger community, and especially from those focus groups. But again, Bill, your point is well taken, and it's definitely not an unreasonable position to take.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure, let's see, there was one more point that maybe I passed over. Well, have there been costs to the city of past police misconduct cases? You know, is there a kind of, is that part of the calculus that
Yeah, it is. It is. And there's been enormous costs to the city, and there's enormous cost to every city to have to defend the conduct of police officers. And I'll give you just one recent example. Perhaps you all read the article about the former police representative Anthony Wagner at the city of Santa Barbara. I mean, they had to pull in and spend enormous money at the cost of the taxpayers for an independent investigation of his conduct, right? There was a lot of allegations of all kinds of misconduct, including, basically like rigging the city policy in favor of like certain cannabis shops as a representative of the police department. It just was a mess, right? It was a huge mess to the city and to the police department, and it cost an enormous amount of money to settle that. And there's still pending litigation against the city because he was ultimately let go, and now he's suing the city. So like there's enormous cost to misconduct or alleged misconduct at the city level, and having more oversight, however much that costs, I guarantee you is less money and to be proactive than what you ultimately will pay in settlements.
So I'm impressed with I just will say this personally, to thank you guys for the work you've been doing and the kind of seems very judicious and thorough effort to understand how any of this can work, how it works elsewhere, the historical foundation of civilian police review, and how it might look in a once established, that there be not tremendous conflict, but the possibility of proactive collaboration once the commission like this came into being. At least, I mean, that's the spirit that you're talking that I'm hearing, which I think is, it's impressive. I guess it's hard work too that you guys have been involved in with a lot of emotion, right?
Rich, can I ask a question, Dick?
Go ahead, Dick.
I posted a question. I don't know if you saw it.
No, I didn't.
I'm curious, what was the reason or the reasons for creating what seems like two different bodies, two different organizations? A civilian oversight board, which is the guts of what this is, I take it, and then also an Office of Police Oversight, each staffed apparently by a different, or at least the Formation Commission envisions them each staffed by a different person. It seems bureaucratically cumbersome. What was the rationale for it? As opposed to one body.
So it's one agency, and the Office of Police Oversight, we needed to call it something, right? We needed to call it something. So we called it the Office of Police Oversight. And that's where the professional staff that are going to be doing the day-to-day work of police, civilian oversight, they are also going to staff the board. So they're going to staff the board. If you think about it, yeah, the auditing and monitoring are going to be done by the Office of Police Oversight. If you think about it, and I always go back to this because that's what I know is on planning commission, right? Is we're planning commissioners, but we're not doing the day-to-day permitting, and we're not doing the day-to-day operations. And we're also not writing the staff report and digesting it and distilling it down to digestible terms for the broader public and for planning commissioners. That's going to be the role of this Office of Police Oversight. Is going to be doing the auditing, the monitoring, the community outreach, the collaboration with the Santa Barbara Police Department, and staffing the board. And they'll be city staff, yeah, professional city staff.
So
Christian, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, because you did say, you introduced that when you were giving the presentation. You want to add anything about this dual function?
Yeah, I mean, it's the hybrid model, right? So it's like they have very distinct charges, right? So the OPO is a professional often, and again, we've allowed for this position in the recommendations to be former law enforcement, right? Because we think that would be important to the function of the role. This will be the person who's actually reviewing the cases, auditing the data, collecting that data, analyzing it, and presenting those findings as a city staff person to the Civilian Oversight Board, which will be a separate independent board made up of appointed civilians, right? Who will look at the outcomes and data that staff member is doing and make recommendations to the police department and to the city council on what we should be doing as far as specific policies and procedures. It's a very proactive approach and data-driven approach to oversight. And this is how most of the hybrid models recently, this is a very modern approach, is having both this review component and the auditing and monitoring component together. And I would recommend, if you're interested in looking at other jurisdictions that are similar in size to Santa Barbara that are doing this very successfully, I would look at Boulder, Colorado, and Madison, Wisconsin.
All right, so we've actually reached the ritualistically, routinely designated time to bring our monthly roundtable to a conclusion. I think Stanley had one announcement, which is, why don't we just say, put something on chat while the time remains if you want people to think about or be aware of something that's happening or something where they can have input. We're saving the chat. You can save the chat on your own. Once again, thank you so much, Gabe Escobedo, for dual hats that you wear, taking them off in our presence. Great. And Christian, great presentation. And I have to say, as an elderly gentleman, how excited I am for the way in which young generation people are addressing these issues. I feel a lot of hope in all this, and I hope I speak for the rest of us in doing that. I think we better just say goodbye and hope you can enjoy this summer moment that we're having, but we need rain as well. So anyway, take care, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dick.
Thank you so much.